Good to hear what's going on the ground. I'm going to start pushing out a little bit into other kind of stakeholders. And if you're like me, when you hear the words business and investment, like, important, I'll sit up. It's crucial, it's important. About slide 3, I start to get a little bit like that. So I'm giving myself the task of trying to share actually what I find interesting and hopeful as we move through the months. I want to start with a recap and step back to workshop 2 and 3, because it kind of sets up sharing 3 things with you today. So we go back to workshop 2. For those who are here, you remember we put a provocation into the space. We said, all right, food security in Western Australia is not about a railway line and fixing that. It's about what sits either side of that railway line. It's the land. And it's about the natural capital and the restoration of that land. And the state government should be dipping in to ensuring for us and the next generation that continues to be productive and well-conserved land. How about $1 billion? That's kind of what we were asking as a provocation. Some of you then after that session came up to kind of check on sanity and gave feedback on that provocation. It was really useful. And I want to take 2 key points from that second session. One point was, yeah, the state government, well, they might contribute, but they might not lead, and they might want to see other people contribute as well. So, sage advice, let's take that forward a little bit today. And the other was natural capital. It's right up there on the public agenda. Not. So in terms of the urgency or the focus on this particular aspect in society, it seems pretty low. Really, will we get the impetus of government? Because again, they tend to follow. So I want to touch on those 2, on 3 things today. The last, I want to return to the place we're at and just share a little story, not in food and agriculture, but in another space that I find both instructive and hopeful. But the main 2 on those 2 points of where could the finance come from? If we want to hold this space for over a decade, the government may not lead, but might lean in, where else? And then also trying to find the right timing to make an ask or more than one ask. So let's start with the different kinds of finance. I would like you to imagine for a moment you've got a few $1 million in your pocket, that you are the representative of a family philanthropy foundation. So we're going to move into the space of philanthropy for a minute, which they're definitely leaning in, particularly to the climate space. And I want to share a bit of a diagram here. May not be able to read it all at the back, but I'm going to kind of point to a few. This is if you were that family with that millions of dollars in your pocket and you go to a matchmaking organization and say, I want my money to go to the most impactful organizations and initiatives in Australia that are making a difference on climate change. These are 25 examples that are all evidence-based. So these are those that are recognized within Australia that can make the most difference. Number 12 and 13 is where we're at. So in terms of transition to sustainable agriculture and food, protect and restore forests and land carbon. So we would be in the space for that conversation, for that matchmaking. Let's take it a little bit further. Well, actually, we're about innovation and scaling solutions as well. And really, we're about all of this because we're trying to change the story to food and agriculture as being positive rather than negative. We want to shift the money. We want to build a movement, and we flip this one up a bit. We start to look at societal things too, support Aboriginal people's climate action, build momentum for clean exports and jobs and transition for affected workers and communities. To be honest, if I carry on, I could put arrows pretty much in all of the 25 there. My point though is this, that the more arrows, the more of a weave, the more you integrate things. So if you're looking about where you place your money, where do you get the most leverage for your effort? That's meaningful. What's interesting, this study came out about 3 years ago on the best initiatives in Australia to make a difference. Last year they did an update of where in Australia was it under-resourced, where was there a gap. So there are 4 out of 6 mystery boxes here that I'm going to fill. So the underfunded, nature as a climate solution, Fossil Fuels Frontlines, Western Australia. First Nations Climate Action. Agriculture and Land Use. And you could say the other two are close anyway. So, if we're matchmaking and we're looking for funding for what we're representing, hopeful that this might be a productive conversation. I think we should be. I'm going to go to another area. I'm looking a little bit at the Malone Institute over here. This is my Vitasoy the other day that I was pouring in my tea, and you might notice that Vitasoy has the Malone Institute in the back of the carton there. I'll let you Google this, but it's a really great story about value creation. If you remember what pitch is really about, is you have something we want, we've got something you want, and there's an exchange going on here. And here's a story in the corporate sector. There is obviously a commercial exchange going on here, but more and more corporates are leaning into this space. If you've read Stuart McAlpine's piece in Farm Weekly recently, there is Unilever, there's General Mills, there are others. They're understanding their supply, they're understanding the need to have different kinds of relationship because there's a recognition of a change in the value creation. This is last week. So there are also organizations that represent different commodities, different produce. This is wool in Australia. Last week, Walmart Plus, Journey to Nature Positive, produced a roadmap. Nature Positive by 2030, full recovery by 2050. They introduced 5 methods to do that. Number 1 is regenerating nature. So corporates leading the space. You can get a sense of the changing the conversation and the different stakeholders that are starting to come into this space when you look at things like the Regenerative Agriculture Conference in Amsterdam last week, the agenda for the forthcoming one in North America in March, public health, start to come in nutrition density. That's another conversation, another conversation. More and more people are becoming relevant in this space. And they can bring funding, they can also bring change in terms of awareness, policy, a lot more levers. So there's I'm going to say a quickening happening here. And these kind of conferences tend to hothouse that. As a little bit of a plug, there are 2 days in September next year, now down at the Optus Stadium for the 3rd Regen Ag Conference in Western Australia. Some significant players should and will be coming to those conversations too. So we're talking about a different design around long-term funding. It is a strategic design, and different kinds of funding comes with different roles in the mix across a 10-year period. But when? So window of opportunity. Anyone seen this? Again, if this workshop happened 2 weeks ago, this would have been a hopeless presentation, but this is a useful presentation. This happened last week. The EU, Strategic Dialogue on the Future of the European Union Agriculture. So this is significant because other parts of the world look to this. What's interesting is this really popped out because of the protests, really agitated protests of farmers towards the end of last year, beginning of this year. And this has happened in 7 months of negotiations. And the mandate from the President of the EU was enable conditions that let farming and nature protection go hand in hand. That's the request. Interesting, when you talk to the people who've been involved in this process, they don't describe it as top-down, politicians telling farmers what to do. We are moving away from a methodology of defining objectives as high as possible for farmers to align with, to actually making steps into the transition in a collective and strategic way. Bit of an echo with a collective impact methodology. I don't expect you to read the small print, but this is the table of contents and it's worth having a look at. And I understand Europe is a different context. There are differences, obviously. But working together for a sustainable and competitive future, promoting a global transition. So part of that is their trade agreements. You won't get in unless you play this game. Access to market. Enhancing sustainable farming practices, including soil management, biodiversity, fertilization, and circularity. We're starting to recognize some of these terms. I wouldn't have it before. Scaling up adaptation, water-resilient agriculture, In my space, personal story, but the last 7 years I've been speaking to a colleague in France, and the reason he's interested in Australia is around water. You guys know how to do it. Your climate will be our climate. Better access to and use of knowledge and innovation. Investments in partnerships and research and innovation. And social innovation as an enabler. They're all in this rather large document. But it happened quickly. And that's what I mean in terms of window of opportunity. It got pushed because there was something that punctured the complacency. Okay, last 2 consecutive Wednesdays in the Western Australian. And I'm not joking. Front page of the state newspaper, consecutive last 2 Wednesdays. Cost of living, food, and are farmers being included in the conversation? Are they happy? Not particularly. Now you might see this as not so relevant, but I would actually argue it's pretty relevant. So creating windows of opportunity for change, where the impossible becomes maybe, probable, preferable policy funding. It can happen really quickly. Think about COVID, all that we had to go through happens really quickly when it's urgent. There is a quickening going on, and that's why I'm hopeful. The conversations are shifting, and they're blowing in this direction. My last thing, Western Australians doing this, so back into our own state and our own place. Does anyone recognise this guy? I'm not saying you should. His name's Michael Sheldrick, and I came across him because I was trying to look at a methodology for change. He's known as Mick. He is the co-founder and Chief Policy Impact Government Affairs Officer at Global Citizen based in New York. He's on the board of the United Nations Centre for Global Citizens. He's 36 years old. Sheldrick was born in Perth, Australia, said to have struggled academically growing up. He was once enrolled in special education classes and was told by a teacher that he probably wouldn't get to university. In 2013, he was Young Western Australian of the Year. He has raised $40 billion US on the issue of global poverty. He's a Perth boy. Now, I'm not just singling him out as our angel who's going to come in and do this for us. Absolutely not. But what he does do is he goes around the world and tells people how to do it. So he's a leadership coach in terms of change. And he uses case studies. He uses international case studies, he uses national case studies, and he uses community case studies. His current preferred community case study is this one, which is Collie. Now, you may agree or disagree with the shift in Collie, and here is Mark McGowan at a press conference, socially distanced at the time, to announce the shutting of the coal station in front of the workers in Collie, and he wasn't pushed out of town, which was the main point, because of all the work that went beforehand, and it's still ongoing. But there are people beyond this room who understand just transition and how to do it well. And as a mining community, the interesting thing is the community there said, you do not give us compensation and fly-in, fly-out jobs. You create a living economy for our community with quality jobs. And it was an involvement, it's a collective that created that shift. And it's been years, and it's still ongoing. But it's also been done by a state Labour government. Some of these people are still ongoing. So I'm hopeful. I think we can do this. I hope it's been interesting too. Different kinds of finance, different shape, a crackling in the wind. There is a quickening. Thanks for listening.